What would you do if everything you owned, the land your grandfather broke his back to build, the soil that fed your family through drought and flood, the only home you had ever known, suddenly belonged to a stranger? A clumsy, sharp-tongued, wide-eyed stranger who arrived by bus with a broken heel, a wrinkled dress, and a letter from a dead man's lawyer. That is exactly what happened to Nathan Blackwood on a blazing Tuesday in June. And that is exactly how Eliza Harmon walked into the most dangerous and most beautiful chapter of her life. Stay with me, dear friends, because this is a story about much more than land or inheritance, or even love. This is a story about what happens when God takes the broken pieces of two stubborn hearts and begins, very quietly, to make something whole. If you're new here, welcome to the Blessed Christian Storyteller, the place where faith meets fiction and where every story leads the heart a little closer to home. Hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and let's begin. The Greyhound bus pulled into Redemption Creek, Texas at 2:30 in the afternoon, and the very first thing Eliza Harmon did upon stepping off was catch her left heel in the gap between the bus step and the curb. She did not fall, not entirely. She performed what could only be described as an elaborate and highly undignified stumble, her arms windmilling outward like a baby bird attempting its first flight, her hat flying off her head and landing in the dry Texas dust, and her travel bag swinging so hard on her shoulder that it struck the man behind her squarely in the chin. "I am so terribly sorry," she said, spinning around to face her victim, her green eyes wide and her cheeks already burning crimson. "Are you all right? Oh, goodness, you're bleeding." The man, a broad-shouldered, sun-bronzed stranger with dark hair and eyes the color of a thundercloud, was indeed touching a small cut on his chin, where the brass buckle of her bag had caught him. He stared at her with an expression she would come to know well. 1 part exasperation, 2 parts bewilderment, and something else beneath it all that she did not yet have a name for. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the way men sound when they have spent years talking to horses. "You're certain? Because my mother always said I was a danger to myself and everyone within a 6-foot radius, and she was not entirely wrong. God rest her. She's not dead. She's in Charleston. I don't know why I said that. I say odd things when I'm nervous." She pressed her lips together. "I'm nervous." The man bent down, picked up her hat from the dust, and held it out to her. There was the faintest trace of something, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one at the corner of his mouth. "Nathan Blackwood," he said. She took the hat. "Eliza Harmon." The ghost of a smile disappeared. Nathan Blackwood stared at her the way a man stares at a rattlesnake that has just crawled into his boot. The color drained from his face, then rushed back. His jaw tightened. His hand, still extended from offering her hat, curled slowly into a fist at his side. "Harmon," he repeated. Just the one word, just her name, but the way he said it told her everything she needed to know about the reception she was about to receive in this little town. Eliza straightened her spine, something her mother had drilled into her since childhood, the one ladylike habit that had actually stuck. She settled her hat back onto her riotous crown of dark curls and looked up at him with all the dignity she could muster, which was somewhat undermined by the fact that she still had bus dust on her cheek. "That's right, Eliza Harmon, niece of the late Silas Harmon, and I believe, Mr. Blackwood, that we have some business to discuss." She picked up her travel bag, turned on her broken heel, it gave a treacherous wobble but held, and walked into the town of Redemption Creek as though she owned exactly half of it. Which, as it turned out, she did. The town of Redemption Creek had not changed much in 50 years, or so old Moses Yates liked to say. The same white-steepled church still presided over the main street like a gentle patriarch, the same feed store, the same diner with its red-checked curtains, the same water tower with Redemption Creek painted in fading black letters. The creek itself ran along the western edge of town, low in the summer heat but still running, threading through the live oaks and cedar with the quiet persistence of a thing that knows it will outlast everything around it. Eliza had never been here before. She had known of Redemption Creek only through occasional letters from her Uncle Silas, brief, gruff dispatches that her mother had read aloud with a mixture of affection and mild horror, since Silas Harmon possessed the vocabulary of a ranch hand and the letter-writing style of a man deeply suspicious of punctuation. But he had loved her. She had always known that. Even as a little girl in Charleston when he had visited perhaps twice a year and sat awkwardly on her mother's good furniture and brought her presents that were wholly inappropriate for a Southern child, a live frog once, a pocket knife another, and a book about the geology of the Texas hill country that she had in fact read cover to cover. She had known that her Uncle Silas saw something in her that her mother's world could not quite accommodate. He had seen that she was the kind of person who caught frogs and read geology books. He had seen that she did not fit in. And now he had left her half a ranch. The lawyer's office was a tidy little room above the hardware store. Mr. Gerald Fenwick, attorney at law, was a small man with a large mustache and the manner of someone perpetually bracing for bad news. "Miss Harmon," he said, shaking her hand and gesturing to a chair, "I'm glad you made the journey. Your uncle's estate is somewhat complex. The letter mentioned half the ranch. I confess I wasn't sure I read it correctly." "You read it correctly." Mr. Fenwick folded his hands on the desk. "Your Uncle Silas owned the Redemption Creek Ranch, 6,000 acres of hill country land including the main house, 4 outbuildings, cattle operation, water rights to the north branch of Redemption Creek, and mineral rights on the eastern 40. He paused. "Your Uncle Silas divided the property equally, 50% to you, 50% to Nathan Blackwood, who has been operating the ranch for the past 4 years." Eliza was quiet for a moment. Through the window she could see the main street below, and on it Nathan Blackwood standing in front of his truck with his arms folded, staring at nothing with the focused intensity of a man trying very hard not to throw something. "He knew," she said. It was not a question. "He knew the will existed. He did not know its full contents until last week, when I was obligated to contact both parties." Mr. Fenwick cleared his throat. "I should tell you, Miss Harmon, that Nathan Blackwood has operated this ranch almost single-handedly since your uncle's health declined. He has made significant improvements. He has a strong attachment to the land." "He has every right to be upset," Eliza said, simply. Mr. Fenwick blinked. He was clearly prepared for something other than reasonable compassion. "Well, yes, he does. But the will is unambiguous and has been verified by 2 witnesses and this office. You are a co-owner of the Redemption Creek Ranch, Miss Harmon. That is the law." Eliza nodded slowly. She looked at the papers in front of her, the deed, the will, the maps of the property with its careful lines marking the creek and the fences and the acreage, 6,000 acres of Texas hill country, cattle and cedar and live oak, and the smell of dust and summer. She thought of her mother in their Charleston townhouse, who had received the news of Silas's bequest with a complicated expression and said only, "He always did have peculiar notions of helping people, your uncle." She thought of her small apartment in Charleston, her job at the library, her carefully ordered and utterly empty life. And she thought of the way she always seemed to be slightly out of step with everything around her, a beat behind the music, a half-inch to the left of where she was supposed to stand. And she thought, with a sudden fierce clarity that surprised her, of the frog and the pocket knife and the geology book. "See her," Uncle Silas had said in every one of those peculiar gifts. "See her. She fits somewhere, just not here." "I'm staying," Eliza said. Mr. Fenwick's mustache twitched. "I beg your pardon? I'm not selling my share, and I'm not going home. I'm staying." She looked up at him with her clear green eyes. "I assume there is somewhere I can sleep on a 6,000-acre ranch." There was, in fact, somewhere she could sleep. There was a perfectly adequate guest room in the main ranch house, which was a sprawling limestone structure that had been built in stages over 80 years and showed it. The original cabin at its heart expanded outward in 3 different directions by 3 different generations with 3 different ideas about architecture, the result being a house that was deeply impractical, slightly labyrinthine, and entirely lovable. The person who showed her to her room was not Nathan Blackwood. It was Pearl Washington, the ranch cook, a broad-shouldered woman of 60 with silver-threaded hair and eyes that saw everything and gave nothing away for free. Pearl looked Eliza over from hat to broken heel with a comprehensive appraisal of a woman who has sized up many people in her time and found most of them wanting. Then she said, "You hungry?" "Desperately," Eliza admitted. "Then come on," Pearl said, and that was, as far as Pearl was concerned, the end of the welcome speech. The kitchen was enormous and smelled of cornbread and something slow-cooked and wonderful. Eliza sat at the long wooden table that had clearly hosted 1,000 meals, and Pearl set a bowl of beef stew in front of her without ceremony, and Eliza ate it with the focused gratitude of a woman who had been on a bus for 14 hours. "Where is Mr. Blackwood?" Eliza asked when the edge had been taken off her hunger. Pearl, stirring something on the stove, did not turn around. "Out." "Is he angry?" A pause. "He's Nathan." Eliza decided to interpret this as a yes and filed it away. "Pearl," she said after a moment, "my uncle, what was he like at the end?" Pearl was quiet long enough that Eliza began to think she wasn't going to answer. Then the old cook turned from the stove, wiped her hands on her apron, and sat down across from Eliza with the deliberate manner of a woman settling in to say something true. "Silas Harmon," Pearl said, "was the stubbornest man God ever put breath into. He was also one of the kindest. Didn't say much. Showed things, you know what I mean? Showed kindness. Showed what he cared about." She looked at Eliza steadily. "He talked about you, more toward the end. Said you had your grandmother's eyes and your grandfather's heart, and that Charleston was going to spend the rest of its life trying to put a lid on you." Eliza felt the grief for the uncle she had barely known settle into her chest, warm and aching at once. "He was right about the lid," she said. Pearl almost smiled. She stood up. "You finish that stew. Your room's the one at the end of the East Hall. Bathrooms across. Nathan," a slight pause, almost imperceptible, "Nathan sleeps in the south wing. You won't run into him unless you go looking." "I don't intend to go looking," Eliza said. Nathan looked at her. "No," she said, with the particular tone of a woman who has watched enough stories begin to know how they end. "I don't suppose you do." She met old Moses the next morning. He was sitting on the fence of the near pasture when she came out for her first real look at the land, a bent and weathered man of perhaps 80, with the kind of face that belonged on a coin, strong-boned and deeply lined, the color of worked leather, his white hair cropped close and his eyes startlingly bright beneath the brim of a hat that had been battered into submission by several decades of weather. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He looked her over with those bright eyes and nodded once, the way very old men nod when something confirms a thing they already suspected. "You got Silas in your face," he said. "Everyone seems to think so," Eliza said, coming to lean on the fence beside him. She looked out at the pasture where a small herd of Hereford cattle moved slowly through the morning light. "Did you know him long?" "Since we were both young enough to be stupid," Moses said. "Came to this ranch when I was 22. Silas was 24. We built that east barn together with nothing but timber and bad language." A ghost of something moved through his ancient face. "Good man. Complicated man. Loved this land so much it ate him alive." He turned those bright eyes on her. "You know why he left it to you?" "The lawyer said—" "Not what the lawyer said. Why?" Moses waited. Eliza thought about it honestly. "Because he thought I needed somewhere to belong?" Moses looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the cattle. "He said, and I'm giving you his exact words, which were not polished words, you understand. He said, "Moses, that girl has got too much life in her for a library. She needs dirt under her fingernails and sky overhead and something worth fighting for." A pause. "He also said you'd probably break 3 things in the first week, but that a person who breaks things is a person who's actually living." Eliza laughed despite herself, a short, startled sound in the morning quiet. "He wasn't wrong about the breaking things." "No," Moses said serenely. "He usually wasn't." From somewhere behind her she heard the sound of boots on dry ground, and she turned to see Nathan Blackwood coming from the direction of the main barn. He was in work clothes, worn jeans, a faded shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, dust on his boots, and he moved with the purposeful economy of a man who has too many things to do and is only doing this particular thing because he cannot avoid it any longer. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes went from Moses to Eliza and back to Moses with the look of a man checking to see if an ambush had been laid. "Miss Harmon," he said, flat, careful. "Mr. Blackwood." She matched his tone, which was harder than it looked because she was constitutionally incapable of sustained coolness and already wanted very much to say something friendly and foolish. "I was hoping we could talk. About how this is going to work." She turned from the fence to face him fully. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I understand that you've built something here and that my being here is," she searched for the word, "disruptive." "That's one word," Nathan said. "I'm open to others." For one swift moment, something moved in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or the ghost of it. Then it was gone. "What do you want, Miss Harmon?" She looked at him steadily. "I want to learn. I want to understand what my uncle left me and why it mattered to him. I want—" She stopped, breathed, said the honest thing. "I want to earn my place here, not just have it because of a piece of paper." Nathan Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her the way he had looked at the cattle, assessing without sentiment, reading something she couldn't quite name. Then he said, "You ride?" "Horses?" she said, and immediately regretted it because what else would he mean on a cattle ranch? And his expression confirmed that he was now questioning whether her uncle had made a terrible mistake. "Yes," he said, with the patience of a man counting to 10 internally. "Horses." "I have ridden horses," she said carefully. "I cannot promise I was good at it." "You'll need to learn." Nathan looked at Moses. "Put her on Biscuit." Moses, still sitting on his fence, was very carefully looking at the cattle and not at either of them. "Yes, sir," he said. Nathan walked away. Eliza watched him go, this man who held half of everything she had just inherited, this man who was furious and silent and controlled, and something else, something she was not yet paying attention to, not yet. "Moses," she said. "You said Biscuit. Is that a gentle horse?" Moses considered this. "Biscuit is a horse of strong opinions, but she's honest, no meanness in her. She'll test you, and then she'll know you." He looked sideways at Eliza. "Bit like Nathan that way." Eliza looked back toward the barn where Nathan had disappeared. The morning light lay golden and warm over the limestone and cedar of the Redemption Creek Ranch. Somewhere out in the pasture, a mockingbird was cycling through its repertoire with fierce joy. She thought, "I am going to fall off that horse. I am going to embarrass myself thoroughly. I am going to stumble and spill things and say the wrong words at the wrong moments and generally be exactly as much of a disaster as I have always been. But I am going to stay." It was, she realized, the first truly free decision she had ever made, and it felt, in a way she had no words for yet, like answered prayer. She fell off Biscuit twice. The first time was almost graceful, in the sense that she slid rather than tumbled, landing in the soft dirt of the paddock with a sound that was more thud than crash. Moses, watching from the fence, said nothing. Nathan, who had appeared in the paddock gate at exactly the wrong moment, said nothing either, but his jaw moved in a way that suggested he was either grinding his teeth or suppressing commentary. The second time was less dignified. Biscuit shied at a rabbit, Eliza lurched sideways, grabbed for the saddle horn and missed it, and landed face first in the paddock dust with completeness that left no room for ambiguity. She lay there for a moment, her cheek against the warm earth, and thought very carefully about what she believed regarding the providence of God. Then she got up, brushed the dust from her face, and asked Moses to help her back up. Nathan, by this point, had walked away, but she noticed, and she filed it carefully, that he walked to the far side of the paddock rather than out of the gate, close enough to hear if she needed help, far enough to give her the dignity of not watching. That small thing stayed with her. By the fourth day, she could stay on Biscuit at a walk and a trot without incident. By the end of the first week, the mare had made her judgment and apparently found Eliza acceptable because she stopped testing and started cooperating, which Moses said was high praise from an animal of Biscuit's discernment. Eliza's hands blistered, her thighs ached from unaccustomed muscles being asked to do unaccustomed things. She wore the wrong shoes twice and had to be rescued by Pearl, who materialized with sensible boots with an expression that clearly indicated she had known this would happen. She attempted to help with the cattle feeding and misjudged the gate mechanism and released 6 calves into the yard, which caused a 20-minute chase involving herself, Moses, and a ranch hand named Danny, who was 17 and found the whole thing magnificent. She broke 2 coffee mugs, a plate, a fence board, how even she couldn't fully explain, and the latch on the bunkhouse door. She also slowly and imperfectly began to learn. She learned the names of the cattle, or some of them, the ones that had names, which were mostly the ones with personalities strong enough to have earned them. She learned that Moses had been on this land for 58 years and knew every inch of it the way a man knows his own face. She learned that Pearl had been cooking for the ranch for 20 years and that her cornbread was, without question, the finest thing Eliza had ever put in her mouth. She learned that Danny the ranch hand wanted to be a veterinarian and was studying for it in the evenings, and that 2 other hands, brothers named Court and Ephraim, had been born 10 miles from here and had never felt the need to go anywhere else. She learned the land. She rode the fences with Moses in the early mornings, and she watched the light come over the hills, and she understood, in a way that surprised her with its immediacy, what Silas Harmon had loved. It was enormous. It was silent in the way that is not silence at all, full of wind and birdsong and the dry conversation of cedar in the breeze. The sky above the hill country was a different sky from Charleston's sky, wider, harder, less polite, offering nothing it hadn't been asked for. And the limestone showed through the thin soil like the bones of the earth, like a reminder that something very old and very patient lay beneath everything. She prayed out here, in the mornings on Biscuit's back with Moses quiet beside her. She prayed the way she had learned to pray after years of her mother's church, where God was orderly and dignified and sat in mahogany pews. And then, later, after she had found her own faith, raggedy and real, she prayed the way she prayed now, honestly, imperfectly, with all her gratitude and confusion laid out in the open. Lord, she prayed on the 3rd morning, I do not know what I am doing here. I suspect you do. I trust you do. Help me not to make a mess of it. Then Biscuit stepped on a loose rock and stumbled, and Eliza grabbed the saddle horn and stayed on, and Moses said quietly, "Good seat," and she took that as an answer of sorts. Nathan Blackwood avoided her with the practiced skill of a man who has made avoiding people an art form. He was not rude. He was never rude. He said good morning when their paths crossed at breakfast and answered direct questions with direct answers and acknowledged her presence with the careful, contained courtesy of someone doing precisely the right thing and hating every moment of it. But he did not eat at the kitchen table when she was there. He arranged his days so that they were on opposite ends of the ranch at all times. When she asked Mr. Fenwick's office to arrange a meeting about the ranch operations, he sent back a note through the lawyer's secretary suggesting they communicate through Mr. Fenwick until the co-ownership terms were formally settled. Eliza stared at that note for a long time. Then she wrote back through the secretary's office, suggesting sending notes through a lawyer for things that could be discussed over breakfast was expensive, time-consuming, and slightly absurd. His reply, again through the secretary, was one line: "I'll see you at breakfast tomorrow." He was at breakfast the next morning. He had clearly been up since before dawn and had the look of a man who has already done 4 hours of work and considers sitting at a table in the company of human beings a minor but necessary hardship. He poured coffee, sat down, and looked at Eliza across the table with his steady gray eyes. "You want to understand the operations," he said. "Yes. The north pasture rotation is in the 3rd week. The mineral supplementation is on the east side through the end of the month. We've got 3 cows due to calve in the next 10 days. He said it crisply, efficiently, like a briefing. "The well pump in the south pasture needs service. I've got a man coming Thursday. The east fence line has 3 sections that need restringing before fall." Eliza listened. She had a small notebook, another habit her mother had given her, useful for once, and she wrote things down. Nathan watched her write and said nothing. "What's the financial picture?" she asked. A slight pause. "Stable. Your uncle kept lean books. No debt on the land. Operating costs are consistent. Cattle prices are up from last year. Is it profitable?" "Yes." He said it without pride or apology. It was simply a fact. "Silas ran a good ranch. I've tried to keep it that way." "I can see that." She looked up from her notebook. "Nathan..." She stopped because she had used his first name without thinking and wasn't sure if that was right or not. He didn't correct her. "Nathan, I am not here to interfere with what you've built. I'm here to learn it." He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, the way he hadn't since that first day at the bus stop. She wondered what he saw. Her mother would have said he saw a woman in a borrowed flannel shirt with calluses forming on her hands and dust perpetually in her hair. Her Uncle Silas might have said he saw something else. He said, "Why?" Not hostile, genuinely asking. "Because it's mine." And then immediately, "Yours, ours. Because a man I loved chose to give it to me, and I don't think love like that should be wasted." The word hung in the air between them. Something shifted in Nathan's face, barely perceptible, a slight softening around the eyes, and then he looked at his coffee cup. "We're moving the north herd Friday," he said. "If you want to learn cattle work, come with us." It was not a warm invitation, but it was an invitation. "I'll be there," she said. The cattle drive was, by any objective measure, a partial disaster. It was also the best day Eliza could remember in years. She stayed on biscuit through all of it, which was the main victory. The north herd of 42 Herefords was moved 2 miles to the creek pasture, and the operation required 4 riders, Nathan, Eliza, Danny, and Court, with Moses on foot managing a gate. Cattle, Eliza discovered, are highly opinionated animals who have strong feelings about which direction they wish to travel and express those feelings at volume and with impressive physical commitment. She lost her hat twice, she miscounted the cattle through a gate and had to recount, she and Biscuit together attempted to head off a stray calf and misjudged the approach and ended up going in a circle, which pleased the calf and no one else. But she kept up, she paid attention, she did exactly what Nathan said when he said it, and she didn't complain, and when she made mistakes, she acknowledged them and corrected without drama. By the time the herd was through the gate and the gate was latched, and everyone had dismounted and stood in the late afternoon gold, Eliza was muddy to the knee and had a long scratch on her forearm from a cedar branch, and her hair had escaped its braid entirely and was doing something feral and spectacular in the wind. Nathan Blackwood looked at her across the backs of the milling cattle. "You did all right," he said. Coming from him, those 3 words had the weight of a standing ovation. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it with all her heart. Moses, riding past them toward the gate, said something very quietly that might have been, in a tone of mild but sincere approval. Danny said loudly and cheerfully, "Miss Harmon, you're good luck. Court lost 3 calves through that gate last time." Court made a sound of profound offense. Eliza laughed. The sound rose up into the wide Texas sky and scattered, and Nathan Blackwood turned away quickly, but not quite quickly enough for her not to see the full, unguarded thing that crossed his face before he caught it. She thought, "Oh, She filed it away very carefully in a private place and said nothing. It was Pearl who first told her about Vera. They were in the kitchen. Eliza had taken to helping Pearl in the evenings, an arrangement that had begun with Eliza offering out of restless helpfulness and Pearl accepting out of shrewd assessment. And Pearl was teaching her to make biscuits, a process that involved more technique than Eliza had expected, and that Pearl approached with the gravity of someone transmitting sacred knowledge. Vera Blackwood, Pearl said, without looking up from the dough she was working, is Nathan's aunt, his father's sister, lives in Kerrville. Eliza waited. Pearl didn't say things without reason. She's been wanting this ranch sold for 15 years. Silas wouldn't sell. Nathan won't sell. Pearl's hands moved with practiced sureness through the dough. Now that Silas is gone and Nathan only owns half, well, she sees opportunity. Does she know about me? Word travels in Redemption Creek. Pearl looked up briefly. She knows. She came to see Nathan last week while you were out with Moses. I don't know what was said, but Nathan came in looking like he'd been hit by a truck. Eliza was quiet, pressing her dough the way Pearl had shown her. What does she want? Money? Vera wants what Vera always wants. She wants to be comfortable and she wants someone else to make it happen. Pearl's voice was without malice, simply clinical. She had a son, Nathan's cousin, Owen. He died 7 years ago. Accident on the ranch. She's never forgiven the land for it. Or Nathan, for that matter, though it wasn't his fault. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Outside, the evening had come in, purple and soft, and the first stars were appearing over the limestone hills. Pearl, Eliza said, do you think she's dangerous? Pearl was quiet for just a beat too long. I think people who want things badly enough and feel entitled to them are dangerous in every sense that matters, she said, and I think you should watch yourself. It was said calmly, but Eliza heard the weight in it. That night, she sat on the back porch in the dark and listened to the creek and the night insects and the immense quiet of the hill country, and she prayed again, this time longer and with more specific concerns. Lord, she prayed, you brought me here for reasons I am still learning. Help me to be wise. Help me to be brave when I need to be. And please, her mind went unbidden to a flash of gray eyes and the ghost of an unguarded expression. Please help me to be careful with the things that aren't mine. The creek ran in the dark below the limestone. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. She was fairly certain it was Nathan going out for the late-night check he made every evening. She'd noticed the pattern, the quiet footsteps, the back door, the hour later when he returned. She'd noticed a lot of things about Nathan Blackwood's patterns, in the way that you notice things when you are trying very hard not to. She went inside before he came back. The fence board happened on a Tuesday. Eliza was walking the near pasture fence line alone. Nathan had shown her how to look for damage, and she'd been practicing her inspection skills in the low-pressure environment of the near pasture, which was close to the house and which Moses checked regularly. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in the goodness of creation, cool and clear and smelling of cedar and the particular clean edge of the air after a dry night. She was looking at a section of fence that seemed slightly irregular when the fence board beneath her, she had climbed to look over the top rail, against Moses's advice and her own better judgment, shifted suddenly and completely without warning. She went down, not the graceful stumble kind of down that she had perfected over a lifetime of being herself, but a real fall, full length, her ankle twisting sharply on the broken board, and her shoulder hitting the ground with a force that drove the breath from her. She lay in the dry grass and looked at the sky and waited for the pain to tell her what it was doing. The ankle was bad. Not broken, she tested it carefully, the way she'd read about in a first aid book somewhere, but badly twisted, already swelling inside her boot. The shoulder was bruised, maybe more. She sat up slowly and looked at the fence board. It was not rotten, she could see that immediately, even through the shock and pain. The wood was dry and sound, but the 2 nails that had held the board in place were shining and bright, new nails, recently driven, and they were set at such an angle that any weight on the board would lever them free. She looked at this for a long time. Then she got up very carefully and limped back to the house. Nathan found her in the kitchen, Pearl already fussing over her ankle with a practiced efficiency, suggesting this was not Pearl's first injury. He came through the back door, saw her, and stopped. Something happened in his face, something quick and involuntary and entirely uncontrolled, gone before she could read it clearly. "What happened?" he said. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which she had noticed was characteristic of him. He listened the way he looked at cattle, with complete attention and without showing his assessment until he had finished gathering information. When she was done, he said, "Show me the board." She showed him. He crouched over it in the afternoon light and looked at the nails for a long time without speaking. She stood beside him, her ankle wrapped and aching, and watched his face. He stood up. He looked at the fence, the pasture, the tree line 50 yards away. His expression gave nothing away, but his hands, she noticed, were very still at his sides in the specific way that hands are very still when they are being deliberately kept that way. "Could be nothing," he said. "The nails were new," she said. "I know." She waited. "I'll look into it," he said. He turned to her, and for a moment the careful distance he maintained was not there, just a man looking at a woman with something direct and unguarded in his face. "You shouldn't be walking fence line alone." "I know that now," she said. "I meant—" He stopped, recalibrated. "I'll walk with you when you want to learn inspection. You shouldn't be out here alone." It was said gruffly, with none of the ease of a man who gives care easily, but it was care. She could hear it. "All right," she said. They walked back to the house without speaking. The sunset was building over the limestone hills in shades of amber and rose, painting the ranch in the colors of a Psalms verse, and Eliza thought, walking carefully beside this contained and complicated man, that she had never felt so simultaneously unsteady and so exactly right about where she was. 3 days later, the water trough in the east pasture was poisoned. Not severely. Moses found it in time, the bitter smell tipping him off before the cattle drank, and Nathan got the vet out within the hour, and they flushed the trough and checked the herd, and found no animal affected. But something had been put in the water. The vet confirmed it. An herbicide poured into the trough. Not enough to kill, but enough to sicken, enough to cost money and time and trust. "Accident?" Pearl said flatly. "No," Nathan said. He said it simply, with the flat certainty of a man who has been accounting for all the evidence and reached his answer. He stood in the kitchen with his coffee and looked at the wall and said, "No," and Eliza, sitting at the table, felt something cold move through her. "Who?" she said. Nathan said nothing, but his silence said something. "Nathan," she kept her voice steady, "who do you think it is?" "I don't know yet," which was not the same as not having suspicions. "Is it about me? Is this someone trying to—" "I don't know yet." He turned to her, and the care was there again, clearer now, less hidden. "I'm not going to let anything happen to this ranch." She heard what he didn't say, or you. She heard it very clearly, and she was very careful not to let on that she had heard it. She met Vera Blackwood on a Saturday. Vera came to the ranch unannounced, as she had been given to understand was her habit, a handsome woman in her mid-60s with the silver blonde hair of someone who had always known she was attractive and had never stopped investing in it. She drove a late-model car that was too well maintained for a woman who claimed to be struggling on a fixed income, and she walked into the ranch house with the proprietorial ease of someone who considered herself a stakeholder. Eliza was reading in the sitting room when Vera appeared in the doorway. The two women looked at each other. Vera's assessment was swift and comprehensive, and delivered with the social smile of a woman trained in the same Southern finishing school traditions as Eliza's mother, which meant it conveyed warmth while communicating something entirely other. "You must be the Harmon girl," Vera said pleasantly. "Eliza Harmon," Eliza said, standing. "And you must be—" "Vera Blackwood, Nathan's aunt." She came into the room and sat in the best chair, the one by the window which gave the best view and the positional advantage, with the unconscious authority of a woman who takes the best chair wherever she goes. "I've been meaning to come by. We're practically family after all. Co-owners." "Co-heirs," Eliza said, because she was precise about these things when it mattered. Vera smiled. "Of course. How are you finding ranch life? It must be such an adjustment for a city girl." "I'm from Charleston," Eliza said, "but I'm finding it very well, thank you." Charleston. Vera's smile suggested she found this both explicable and insufficient. "And you plan to stay? Permanently?" "I do." How brave. The two words were a work of art. Sympathetic on the surface, something sharper beneath. It's such hard work, you know. And Redemption Creek is a small world. I imagine you have a whole life waiting for you back home. "I imagine the life worth living is the one you choose, not the one that's convenient," Eliza said pleasantly. Vera looked at her with something that sharpened behind the social smile. Silas always said the Harmons were forthright people. He was a Harmon himself. He was. Vera folded her hands in her lap. He was also, in the end, a man who let sentiment drive his decisions. He was fond of you, dear, but fondness isn't the same as wisdom. This ranch needs steady, experienced leadership, not a slight pause loaded with everything that pause could carry, not a learning curve. "I'm grateful for your concern," Eliza said. "I'll take it under advisement." Vera studied her for a moment with eyes that had stopped pretending to be warm. "You're tougher than you look." "People usually think so," Eliza said. "Then they find out I'm exactly as tough as I look, which is apparently tough enough." Vera left 20 minutes later after an exchange with Nathan in the hallway that Eliza could not hear, but whose tone came clearly through the door. Low, urgent on Vera's part, and very quiet and final on Nathan's. When he came into the sitting room after Vera's car had left, he looked at Eliza sitting in her chair with her book open and her aunt's best chair empty across from her, and something moved behind his eyes. "What did she want?" he asked. "To assess me. I think I passed in the sense that I failed her particular test, which means I passed mine." Nathan sat down in the chair across from her, Vera's chair, she noted, and ran a hand over his face. He looked tired in the bone-deep way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. "She wants me to buy out your share," he said. "I know." "I won't do it," he said it quickly, with a certainty that surprised her to look up. This ranch was Silas's to leave as he chose. What he chose was for you to have half. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. She looked at him. "Nathan, you know you don't have to." "I know what I don't have to." He looked back at her steadily. "I also know what's right." The evening light was coming through the window, crossing the distance between them, and Eliza Harmon sat very still and thought about the sovereignty of God and the strange winding paths by which he brought his purposes to pass. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and looked away. But he did not leave. He stayed in his chair in the fading light, and she stayed in hers, and they sat in the same room together for the first time without the weight of avoidance between them. And that small thing, she thought, was a kind of beginning. The second accident happened on Wednesday. Eliza had developed a habit of riding the creek trail before dawn, the hour when the hill country was most itself. The mockingbirds just beginning, the deer still moving in the low light, the sky turning from violet to rose above the limestone bluffs. It was her prayer time and her thinking time and her simply being time, and Biscuit had settled into it with her, the mare moving quietly along the familiar path with the unhurried attention of an animal who was also, in some animal way, taking in the morning. The bridge over the south fork of the creek was a simple wooden structure, 20 years old but solid, maintained by Nathan with the same thoroughgoing care he gave everything. Eliza crossed it every morning. That Wednesday, when Biscuit's front hooves hit the bridge boards, something gave way, not all at once, not catastrophically, but with a slow, terrible groaning and a lurch downward on the right side that sent the mare sideways in a panicked scramble. Eliza stayed in the saddle through the first violent movement, lost it in the second, and went over the right side of the bridge and into the creek. The South Fork at that point was 3 feet of moving water over gravel bed. It was not deep enough to drown her, but it was not kind. She hit the water and the gravel simultaneously, the impact driving her under and back and tumbling her before she found her feet and stood, gasping and streaming, in the middle of the creek. Biscuit was on the bank, unhurt, reins dragging, making the anxious sounds of a horse who has had a terrible morning and would very much like it to stop now.
Eliza stood in the water and looked at the bridge. The right support beam had not rotted. She could see from where she stood in the creek that it had been cut. Not all the way through, that would have been too obvious, but nearly, 3/4 of the way through with a saw, leaving just enough material to hold until weight was applied. She stood in the cold water in the early morning light and felt for the first time something that was not uncertainty or despair, but simple, clear fear. Someone was not trying to warn her. Someone was not trying to inconvenience her. Someone was trying to hurt her. She got herself and Biscuit back to the barn. She was dripping and bruised and had a cut above her left eyebrow from the gravel that was bleeding freely into her eye. And when she came into the yard, it was Nathan who saw her first, who was already up and headed toward the south pasture, and who stopped walking as though he ran into a wall. He crossed the yard to her in about 4 strides. He put his hands on her shoulders, both of them, steady and warm through her wet shirt, and looked at her face with an intensity that was not calm at all. Not calm, not controlled, not the careful distance of these past weeks. "What happened?" he said. Not a question, a demand. She told him. He listened with his hands still on her shoulders, and she watched his face go through something, fear first, fast and bright, then something colder and more deliberate beneath it. When she mentioned the cut beam, his eyes went flat and hard. "You're going to the clinic," he said. "Nathan, you're going to the clinic and then you're going to stay in the house while I look at that bridge." He held her gaze. "Will you do that?" There was something in his voice that she had not heard before, something that was not authority or command, but something rawer than that. She thought of Pearl's warning. She thought of Vera's careful eyes. She thought of new nails at wrong angles and herbicide in the trough. "Yes," she said. The doctor in town, a practical woman named Dr. Aguilar, who had been stitching ranch hands together for 20 years, put 3 stitches above Eliza's eyebrow, assessed the bruised ribs, and told her she was lucky and stubborn, and that the 2 qualities generally went together. Eliza sat on the examining table in her borrowed dry clothes and tried to think clearly. Pearl sat in the corner of the examining room and said nothing, which was how Pearl showed that she was frightened. "Pearl," Eliza said. What does Nathan know that he isn't saying?" A long silence. "There have been other things before you came," Pearl said finally. "Feed contaminated, a water pump disabled. Nathan thought it was bad luck or carelessness." She looked at Eliza directly. "He doesn't think that anymore." "He thinks it's Vera." Pearl said nothing, which was clear as saying yes. "Can he prove it?" "Not yet." Eliza looked at the ceiling of the small examining room and thought about a woman who had been watching this ranch from a distance for 15 years, waiting, calculating, a woman who had lost her son on this land and transferred that grief into ownership, into the belief that if she could just control this land, she could control the grief itself. She thought about faith and despair and the terrible things people do when they have run out of the first and are full of the second. "Pearl," she said, "does Nathan know that I went to the bridge deliberately, that it wasn't just my usual—" "He knows," Pearl said. "He knew before you told him." "How?" "Because," Pearl said, with the quiet weight of a woman who has watched 2 people for weeks, "Nathan Blackwood has been paying attention to everything that happens to you since the day you fell off that bus. He just hasn't been letting on." Eliza said nothing. Pearl stood up. "Come on, he'll be waiting." He was waiting, in the clinic parking lot, leaning against his truck, and he straightened when he saw her and looked at her face with the 3 stitches and the bruised eye, and something moved so visibly across his expression that she had to look away. "The bridge was cut," he said. "I know. I've called the sheriff's department. Deputy Briggs is coming out." She looked up at him at that. Something in the word Briggs had a sound she couldn't identify. "Is that good?" Nathan's expression was carefully neutral in a way that answered her question. "It's procedure," he said. "Come on, I'm taking you home." She got in the truck. He drove back to the ranch in the silence she had come to know was not emptiness, but the way he processed things, not avoiding, but containing, giving himself space to reach his conclusions before he spoke. They were through the main gate before he spoke. "You could leave," he said. "Just that." She looked at him. "You know I won't." His hands tightened on the wheel. Someone is hurting you, Eliza. This is real. This isn't... He stopped. You could go back to Charleston. Keep your share on paper. Let me deal with... Nathan. He looked at her. I am not leaving my ranch, she said, and I am not leaving you to deal with this alone. The truck stopped. They were at the house. He sat still for a moment, and she sat still beside him, and the morning had become full and blue around them. You said my ranch, he said. I meant ours. He looked at her for a long moment, and she let him look, and neither of them said the thing that was becoming very clear in the space between them, because it was not yet time, and they both knew it. Come inside, he said finally. Pearl's going to want to feed you. Deputy Colton Briggs was a tall man with a pleasant face and the manner of someone who has learned to be liked and found it useful. He came to the ranch that afternoon and was thorough and courteous and wrote things down in his notebook and told Nathan and Eliza that he would investigate fully and keep them informed. He stayed for 45 minutes. He walked the bridge. He photographed the cut beam. He asked all the right questions. And Eliza, sitting in the ranch house sitting room while Nathan walked Briggs back to his cruiser, had the slow and unpleasant sensation of a woman who has met this particular kind of courtesy before, in lawyers who say the right words, and administrators who make the right notes, and who then do precisely nothing. She could not have said what gave her the feeling. Perhaps it was the way his eyes moved when she mentioned the fence board, a fraction too quick, a fraction too controlled. Perhaps it was the way he said Vera Blackwood when Nathan mentioned that name, in a tone that was ever so slightly too surprised. Perhaps it was just intuition, which she had learned to trust, clumsy body and sharp tongue notwithstanding. She went to the kitchen and found Moses at the table with his coffee, and she sat down across from him. Old Moses, she said. Tell me about Deputy Briggs. Moses looked at her over his coffee with those brilliant old eyes. What do you want to know? Anything that isn't in the brochure. Moses drank his coffee, set the cup down. He grew up in Kerrville. His mama was the Blackwood family's housekeeper for 20 years. He and Owen Blackwood were friends. Vera Blackwood paid for his first year at the police academy. He looked at Eliza with his bright, old, everything-seeing eyes. That enough? It was more than enough. Thank you, she said. She went to find Nathan. She found him at the barn. He was working. There was always something to work on, and she had noticed that Nathan Blackwood, when he was thinking hard, worked harder, as though physical labor gave his mind permission to process what it couldn't sit still enough to face. He was repairing the barn door track, and he kept working when she came in, which meant he was either very focused or he had heard her coming and was buying himself time. She stood in the barn doorway and said, "Briggs knows Vera." He stopped working, set down his tools, turned around. "I know," he said. "You knew when you called him." "I knew." His jaw moved. "But I have to go through procedure. If I don't involve the sheriff's department and something else happens..." He stopped. "I can't protect you outside the law, Eliza." She crossed the barn to where he stood. She was not a woman who advanced into difficult conversations lightly. She preferred to approach them from oblique angles, to say things sideways. But the 3 stitches above her eye and the bruised eye had sharpened something in her. "Eliza, Nathan," she said, "do you think Briggs is helping her?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think Briggs is a man who owes Vera Blackwood and believes she's been wronged. I think he's not a bad man, but he is a compromised one." He looked at her steadily. "I think we can't trust him, and I think we're going to need to be very careful." "We?" she said. "We." It was simple, certain, uncomplicated by the weight of everything else between them. She breathed. "What do we do?" "We document everything ourselves. Photographs, notes, dates. We find someone in the sheriff's department we can trust who isn't Briggs. We keep our eyes open, and you don't go anywhere on this ranch alone, not until this is over." It was the lightest touch, It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It rearranged her entire understanding of the situation. "All right," she said, and she was pleased her voice came out steady. She called Pastor Emmanuel Reed on a Thursday because Pearl suggested it and because she was smart enough to take good suggestions when they were given. Pastor Emmanuel was the pastor of Redemption Creek Community Church, a congregation that included most of the town in some capacity. He was a stocky black man in his 50s with the kind of voice that had clearly been trained by years of preaching, full-bodied and warm, with a natural cadence that made ordinary sentences feel worth listening to. He met her at the church, which was cool and white-walled and smelled of old wood and something faintly floral. He sat across from her in a pew and listened to everything she told him with the complete, unhurried attention that she had come to associate with people who genuinely believe that the person in front of them is the most important thing in the world at that moment. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How is your spirit?" She blinked. "Your beg of pardon?" "Your spirit. In the middle of all of this, the danger, the complications, the very eventful arrival, how are you inside?" She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things when she was paying attention. "I'm scared," she said, "but not the kind of panicking scared. The kind that makes you pray harder, clearer." She looked at her hands. "When I'm out on this land in the mornings, I know this sounds odd. Say it. I feel held, like something enormous and very patient is holding all of this, including me, and it knows what it's doing even when I can't see it. Does that sound like self-comfort?" "It sounds like faith," Pastor Reed said. She was quiet. "Miss Harmon, your uncle came to this church for 40 years. The last 3 years, when his health was declining, he used to sit right about where you're sitting now and talk to me about what he was planning, about you. He leaned forward. He prayed for you by name at every prayer meeting. He said, 'Lord, show Eliza where she belongs. She's been lost too long in a life that doesn't fit her.' He looked at her with kind eyes. 'Silas Harmon was a man of faith, Miss Harmon. He didn't leave you this ranch by accident. He left it to you because he trusted that God had a plan for you here that includes the hard parts.'" Eliza felt the tears before she could stop them, quick and hot, the kind that came from some deep place that had nothing to do with the moment and everything to do with years. "I didn't know he prayed for me," she said. "Every week," Pastor Reed said simply. She sat with that for a long time. The church was quiet around her. The light came through the plain windows and lay on the wooden floors, and she felt in it the accumulated weight of 40 years of a man's faithful prayers, and she felt, she could not have put it another way, received. "Pastor," she said when she could trust her voice, "I need to know if there's anyone in the sheriff's department besides Briggs who I can trust." Pastor Reed looked at her thoughtfully. "There's a detective, Irene Salcedo. She transferred here from San Antonio 3 years ago. She's outside Briggs's circle." He paused. "She goes to this church. Can I speak to her? I'll arrange it." Detective Irene Salcedo was a compact, precise woman in her 40s who moved like someone who has spent her career expecting trouble and has made peace with that. She met Eliza at the diner on a Saturday morning when the place was full and their conversation would look like nothing in particular to anyone watching. Eliza laid it out systematically. The fence board, the trough, the bridge, the photographs Nathan had taken of each incident, the timeline, the connection between Briggs and Vera, the pattern. Salcedo listened and said nothing and drank her coffee. Then she looked at the photographs on Eliza's phone with careful, methodical attention. "You've documented this well," she said. "My co-owner was in law enforcement before ranching," Eliza said, which wasn't precisely true. Nathan had studied criminal justice for 2 years before coming back to the ranch, but it was close enough. He knows how to document. Salcedo looked at the photographs, looked at Eliza. "How many people know about this meeting?" "Pastor Reed, Pearl, Moses. Keep it that way. Salcedo set down her coffee cup. "What you have here is circumstantial but compelling. What I need is something that links a person to the physical acts. Do you have any idea who is actually doing the work? Vera's in her 60s. She's not cutting bridge beams herself." "No," Eliza said. "Not yet." "Then that's what we need." Salcedo looked at her steadily. "I'm going to be honest with you, Miss Harmon. If Briggs is involved, this is sensitive. I need to build this carefully. I need time." "How much time?" "As much as it takes." She met Eliza's eyes. "In the meantime, you need to be very careful. This escalated fast. Fence board to bridge beam in 3 weeks. Someone is getting impatient." She stood, left the exact cost of her coffee on the table. "Don't be alone on that property." She walked out of the diner with the measured pace of a woman who does everything with exactly the right amount of urgency and no more. Eliza sat with her untouched coffee and looked out at Redemption Creek's Main Street in the Saturday morning light, and she prayed quietly and specifically and with the focused clarity of a woman who knows what she's asking for and trusts the one she's asking. "Lord," she prayed, "I need you to move, fast enough to be safe, slow enough to be right. And I need you to keep Nathan from doing something noble and terrible in the meantime." She left the diner and drove back to the ranch. She told Nathan about Salcedo that evening, and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Good. I didn't tell you first because I know why." He looked at her. "You were right not to." She sat down at the kitchen table. Pearl had gone to bed. Moses was in his cottage. The ranch house was quiet around them with that deep, old quiet that limestone houses have at night. "Nathan," she said, "tell me about Owen." He went very still. She waited in the way she had learned to wait with him, without filling the silence, without backing away from the question. "Owen was my cousin. He was 24. He was..." A pause. "He was wild. Not bad wild, just full of something that couldn't settle. He came to work on the ranch because he needed grounding and Silas took him in." Nathan looked at the table. "There was an accident with a tractor. Rollover. He died on the way to the hospital." His voice was carefully level, the way it gets when something costs a great deal to say. "I was there. I wasn't operating the tractor, but I was there. And Vera..." He stopped. "Vera needed someone to blame. I was convenient." Eliza was quiet. She thought about grief and blame and the way pain, when it has no proper channel, finds a wrong one. She thought about Vera Blackwood coming to this ranch for 15 years with her carefully maintained hair and her social smile and her cold eyes, nursing a wound that had nothing to do with land and everything to do with her son. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "No." He said it simply, without self-pity or argument. "I've made my peace with that, with God and with Owen's memory." He looked at her. "But Vera hasn't, and people who haven't made their peace are dangerous. You know that." "I know that," she said. "Eliza." He said her name with a particular weight, the way she had noticed he only said it when he was about to say something that cost him something. "Whatever happens in the next days or weeks, I need you to trust me, even if I ask you to do something that doesn't make sense, even if I'm not explaining fully because there isn't time." She looked at him across the table, this man with his gray eyes and his careful hands and his contained and guarded heart, who had built something beautiful and honorable in this place, and who was now, imperfectly and awkwardly and with great effort, letting someone else into it. "I trust you," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Something shifted in his face, profound and undefended, the kind of shift that happens when a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time sets it down. "Good," he said. They sat in the kitchen a while longer. When Eliza finally said goodnight and went to bed, she passed through the hallway of the limestone house that had been built in stages by 3 generations, and she put her hand against the old wall and felt its solidity and thought about faith and hope and the peculiar mercy of a God who hides good things in improbable places. She had a feeling, deep and clear and certain, that things were coming to a head. It happened on a Friday night. Eliza awoke at 2 in the morning to the smell of smoke. It was faint at first, the kind of thing that inserts itself into sleep as a question, a wrongness at the edge of dream. Then it sharpened, and she was awake all the way, sitting up in her bed in the east room with her heart already going, and the smell of smoke clear and deliberate in the air. She did not take time to think. She had read enough about fires in old structures to know that the thinking had to happen before, and that once you smelt smoke, the only right action was immediate. She pulled on her boots. She'd been sleeping in them half the time lately, a habit Nathan had noticed without comment, grabbed her phone, and was out of her door in under a minute. The smoke was coming from the south side of the house, the south wing, Nathan's wing. She ran. She didn't think about anything except the smell and the direction. She covered the hallway in seconds and burst through the door to the south wing to find Nathan already up and moving. He must have woken a fraction before her, because he was standing in his own doorway with a fire extinguisher and the look of a man who has assessed a situation and is already inside it. The fire was in the storage room at the end of the south wing. Old wood, old shelving, a concentrated start. Deliberate, she could see, even in the orange heat and the smoke, but Nathan had caught it early, and the extinguisher was doing its work, and together they had it under control before the first fire truck appeared at the ranch gate. They stood in the hallway afterwards, smoke smelled and ash smudged, the storage room dripping and charred behind them, and Nathan looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't go." "No," she agreed. "You told me to go." "You did." He looked at her with an expression she had no category for and had stopped trying to categorize. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," and because she was Eliza Harmon and could not sustain gravity indefinitely, "Also, your shirt is on backwards." He looked down. It was. He'd thrown it on in the dark, and the buttons were at the back. Something that she had never seen before happen on Nathan Blackwood's face. A full, genuine, undefended laugh. Short and rough, as though it had surprised him too, but real. She thought, I will remember this. Exactly this. The smoke and the ash and the fire truck lights through the window, and Nathan Blackwood laughing. Detective Salcedo arrived at the ranch at 7 the next morning.
With her was a deputy Eliza hadn't met before, young, serious, carrying a camera, and an investigator from the county fire marshal's office. They went through the burned storage room with careful attention, and when they came out, Salcedo's face was set and purposeful. "Accelerant," she said. "Point of origin is in the corner by the exterior wall. The window there was forced." She looked at Nathan. Someone came in from outside. This was not internal. Nathan nodded. He had known. She could see that he had known. "I have enough for a warrant," Salcedo said. She looked between Nathan and Eliza with the measured expression of someone holding something significant. "I need to tell you, we've had Vera Blackwood under loose surveillance since Miss Harmon came to see me. 2 nights ago, we observed a meeting at a gas station outside Kerrville between Vera Blackwood and a man named Dale Pruitt. Pruitt has a record, property crimes, 1 assault, and," she paused just briefly, "he was seen leaving Redemption Creek at 11:43 last night." Nathan was very still. "Briggs," he said. Salcedo met his eyes. "Is cooperating fully. Once I made clear what we had, he understood the situation. He's made a statement." She said it without judgment, only fact. He didn't know about the fire. He thought he was just slowing the investigation, giving Vera time to pressure you into a buyout. He didn't know it had escalated to physical harm. "He should have known," Nathan said quietly. "Yes," Salcedo said. "He should have. He's going to have to answer for that." She straightened. "I have a warrant for Vera Blackwood. I have enough on Pruitt for arrest on last night's fire. This is over, Mr. Blackwood. This is done." The morning was bright over the ranch, the sky its wide hill country blue, the cattle moving in the pasture behind the house with their unhurried bovine calm. Eliza stood in the yard of the ranch she had come to 6 weeks ago with a broken heel and a lawyer's letter, and she felt the morning on her face, and she breathed, and she thanked God with her whole, imperfect, wholly alive heart.
Vera Blackwood was arrested at her house in Kerrville at 9:45 that morning. She was released on bond that afternoon, and she would have a long legal road ahead of her, and Eliza did not know how that road would end, but she knew that it was in other hands now, in the hands of the law, and, above all, in the hands of a God she trusted. She thought about Vera, not with anger, or not only with anger, but with the complicated grief you feel for someone whose pain has driven them to terrible places. She thought about Owen. She thought about what loss does to people who do not know how to surrender it. That evening, she went to the little church and sat in the quiet and prayed for Vera Blackwood. It was not easy. It was possibly the hardest prayer she had ever prayed, harder than the fearful ones, harder than the urgent ones. But she prayed it, imperfectly and with effort, because she believed that forgiveness was not a feeling you waited for, but a choice you made and kept making until it became real. She was still sitting there when the door opened and Nathan came in and sat beside her in the pew. He was quiet for a while. Then, "Pearl told me you were here." "Of course she did." He looked at his hands. "I thought about what you said about Vera." He paused. "I've been angry at her for 7 years, since Owen died. I let her be angry at me and I kept my distance, and I never—" He stopped. "I never prayed for her. I never tried to understand." "You were grieving too," Eliza said. "That's not an excuse." "No," she agreed, "but it's a context." He looked at her. In the light of the little church, with the late sun coming through the plain windows, she could see his face fully, without reserve, without the guard he kept so carefully. He looked like someone who has set down a burden he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "I owe you an apology," he said. She blinked. "For what?" "For the way I treated you when you arrived, for the weeks of distance, for making this harder than it needed to be." He held her gaze with those steady gray eyes. "You came here in good faith. You came here and you worked and you bled and you stayed when any sensible person would have left. And his jaw worked. "I was too wrapped up in my own fear of losing this place to see what you actually were." She was very quiet. "What am I, Nathan?" He looked at her for a long moment. "The best thing that's happened to this ranch in a long time. The best thing that's happened to me." In the quiet of the little church, with the evening coming in and the Redemption Creek making its patient sound outside the window, Eliza Harmon felt something settle into place, like a bone finding its socket, like a key in a lock, like the last piece of a thing you have spent a long time puzzling, finally, undeniably fitting. She took his hand. It was large and calloused and warm, and it closed around hers with the sure, unhurried sureness of something that was simply right. "The best thing that's happened to me, too," she said. Outside, a mockingbird began its evening song, cycling through every voice it knew, extravagant and joyful in the dying light. 3 months later, the Redemption Creek Ranch looked the same, and everything about it was different. The storage room had been rebuilt, Nathan and Moses and Danny and Eliza working on it together on a Saturday that involved a great deal of hammering and Pearl bringing out lemonade and Eliza managing to drive a nail straight every third attempt, which Moses said was improvement. The bridge over the South Fork had been replaced with a solid new structure. The fence line had been inspected and repaired, every board sound, every nail set true. The legal proceedings involving Vera Blackwood were ongoing, as legal proceedings always are, slow and procedural and not yet concluded. Dale Pruitt had pled guilty to the fire and the bridge damage and awaited sentencing. Colton Briggs had resigned from the sheriff's department and was cooperating with the investigation, and whatever would happen to him was in proper hands. Detective Irene Salcido had been commended by the county, and Pastor Reed had said at Sunday service that justice and mercy were not opposites, but a single thing seen from 2 angles, and that Redemption Creek had been given the chance to see both. Eliza's mother came to visit in September. Dorothy Harmon arrived by car. She had refused the bus, she said, citing civilization, in a cream-colored dress and heels that were entirely wrong for a ranch, and a hat that was entirely right for everything, because Dorothy was a woman who had always known that the hat was the point. She stepped out of the rental car in the drive of the Redemption Creek Ranch, looked at the limestone house with its 3 mismatched additions and its wide front porch, looked at the hill country stretching in every direction under a September sky the color of a blessing, looked at her daughter standing on the porch in boots and jeans with calluses on her hands and 3-month-old stitches healed above her left eye and her riotous curls loose in the wind, and Dorothy Harmon, who had not shed a tear in public in 40 years on the grounds that it was unseemly, put her mouth over her hand and cried. Eliza went down the steps and hugged her mother on the drive in the September sun. "Mama," she said, "you look like yourself," which was the most extraordinary thing Dorothy Harmon had ever said to her, and they both knew it. "I know," Eliza said. Nathan met Dorothy Harmon at dinner that evening, which Pearl had made into something approximating an occasion without making it fussy, because Pearl understood that occasions needed to feel like themselves and not like performances. Nathan was polite and careful, and he called Dorothy ma'am every time, which Dorothy considered correct, and he answered her questions about the ranch with quiet clarity, and she asked a great many questions, because Dorothy Harmon was a woman who had learned to assess situations through questions the way other people used observation. After dinner, when Eliza was doing the dishes and Nathan had gone out for his evening check, Dorothy sat at the kitchen table with Pearl and said, "Well, Pearl agreed. "He looks at her as though she is the most sensible thing in an unreasonable world," Dorothy said. "He does," Pearl said. "And she looks at him as though she has finally found the person she can fall in front of without embarrassment." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "You know, Silas always said Eliza needed someone who would appreciate the whole of her, not just the best parts." "Nathan's seen the whole of her," Pearl said, "the mud and the stitches and the calves in the yard." Dorothy nodded slowly. "He's a good man." "Yes, ma'am, he is." Dorothy looked at the kitchen of the ranch house, the old wooden table and the big stove and the shelves of jars and the window with its view of the hill country going gold in the evening. "My brother built something fine here," she said softly. "He did," Pearl said. "And then he gave it to the right person." Dorothy pressed her lips together against whatever feeling was rising. Then she said, practically and without sentiment, "More coffee?" And Pearl poured it, and that was their understanding settled. The proposal, when it came, was entirely consistent with Nathan Blackwood. It was not over a candlelit dinner or in a meadow of wildflowers, or with any of the orchestrated romanticism that the occasion is often given. It was in the barn, on a Tuesday morning, while they were doing the monthly equipment inventory that Nathan conducted with the same thorough regularity he brought to everything. Eliza was on the second rung of the ladder checking the upper shelf, and Nathan was below writing things down on the clipboard, and they were having a conversation about whether the small baler needed service before the fall cut. And Nathan said, "Yes, before the fall cut," and "Eliza." The way he said her name made her look down. He was looking up at her, and in his hand, not a ring box, not yet, those would come in a moment. In his hand was a small piece of paper, folded. He held it up to her, and she climbed down the ladder and took it and unfolded it. It was a deed, not the real deed, not legal, not notarized, but handwritten in his precise and careful script on plain paper. Redemption Creek Ranch, 100% belonging to Eliza Harmon, who came here on a broken heel and stayed, and who made it more itself than it has ever been. And Nathan Blackwood, who has been waiting, without knowing it, for someone to make the whole of this make sense. Co-owners, partners, come what may. She looked at it for a long time. She could hear the ranch around her, the cattle in the near pasture, the mockingbird in the cedar, the creek running in the distance. She could feel the October morning cool on her skin. She looked up at him. "I love you," she said, because Eliza Harmon had always been direct when she had something true to say. "I came here to find where I belonged, and I found you, and they turned out to be the same thing." Nathan Blackwood looked at her, the woman who had fallen off a bus and a horse and a fence and into the creek and into the middle of his life, and whatever had been contained and guarded and carefully kept for so long in him simply opened, completely, irretrievably, like a gate that has been held against its will and finally swings free. "I love you," he said, "and I've been trying to say so for about 2 months and failing because I'm not," he gestured vaguely at himself, "I'm not particularly eloquent." "Nathan," she said, "the man who wrote that deed is the most eloquent person I have ever met." He pulled her close and she went willingly, and in the barn of the Redemption Creek Ranch on a Tuesday in October, they stood together in the good plain light and held on to each other, and it was not graceful and it was not perfect. Her elbow caught his ribs going in, and he laughed that short, surprised laugh she loved, and it was entirely and completely right. They were married in the spring. The ceremony was in Redemption Creek Community Church, with Pastor Emmanuel Reed presiding, and the day was everything the hill country is in April, warm and bright and smelling of bluebonnets and the creek running full with the winter's rain finally moving through. Dorothy Harmon sat in the front pew in a remarkable hat and wept with the dignified restraint of a woman who has been practicing dignified restraint for 60 years and cannot quite contain it today. Pearl sat beside her and handed her tissues without comment. Moses sat at the end of the row with his ancient suit and his bright eyes and the look of a man who has waited long enough for a thing and found it exactly right. Danny was best man, which had surprised him so thoroughly that he'd knocked over a chair when Nathan told him. Salcedo was there, in the back, in civilian clothes, with the expression of someone who rarely allows herself occasions and is quietly glad to be given one. Mr. Fenwick was there, with his large mustache and his braced-for-news expression, which was for the first time in memory unnecessary. The vows were simple. Pastor Reed had given them the traditional words and told them to say what they meant, and Nathan said what he meant in careful, quiet, absolute words that made Eliza cry before she finished wiping the first tear, which was so entirely in character that half the congregation smiled. And Eliza said what she meant in a voice that started strong and softened somewhere in the middle and ended clear and certain, and Nathan looked at her through all of it with those steady gray eyes that she had stopped trying to read and simply received. Afterward, in the churchyard in the April sun, with everyone around them, and the mockingbird overhead, and the bluebonnets along the fence making the color of a promise, Nathan took both her hands and looked at her and said, quietly, just for her, "You came here on a broken heel and a broken life, and you healed both. We healed both." He looked at the sky and back at her. "God's good." "Inconveniently so," she agreed. "He keeps giving me more than I know what to do with." "Then I guess we'll figure it out together. We'll break some things. Probably. And fix them. Yes." He lifted her hand and held it against his chest, where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "That's what we do." The Redemption Creek Ranch in the years that followed was a place of imperfect and abundant life. There were good years and hard years, as there always are on land that requires everything from you and gives everything back. There were calving seasons and fence repairs endured, and floods survived. There were mornings of such beauty that you had to stop what you were doing and just receive them. There were evenings on the back porch, with the creek sounds coming up through the live oaks and the whole vast hill country going quiet in the dark. Eliza Harmon Blackwood broke things regularly and fixed them, most of them. She fell off horses and got back on. She said the wrong thing and made it right. She learned the land with the same thorough, impractical love her uncle had for it, and the land gave it back the way land does. Not in the words you want to hear, but in the solid, patient language of seasons and soil, and the thing that is still there when everything else has passed. Nathan Blackwood learned to talk. Not easily and not all at once, but gradually in the way of a man who has found someone worth speaking his heart to. He learned that love given freely is not a weakness but a foundation, and a woman who falls down gets back up more reliably than one who never falls, and that the best inheritance he had ever received was not 6,000 acres of hill country, but a letter from a dead man's lawyer that brought him Eliza. Old Moses lived to 91. He sat on fences and said true things until the very end, and when he died, he was buried on the eastern edge of the ranch at his request, where the limestone breaks through the soil and the sky is as widest as it is. And Nathan and Eliza stood at his grave in the hill country mourning and said goodbye to one of the best men either of them have ever known. Pearl cooked for the ranch for another 12 years. She eventually moved to San Antonio to be near her grandchildren, and the ranch had 3 different cooks in the years after, all of them good, none of them Pearl, and Pearl came back every Thanksgiving and made the cornbread, and everyone understood that this was the proper and necessary order of things. Danny became a veterinarian. He drove a truck with the Redemption Creek Ranch number on speed dial, and he came out for every difficult calving and every sick animal with the same cheerful competence that had always been his. And Danny and Eliza always talked too long, and Nathan always eventually appeared in the doorway and cleared his throat, and Danny always laughed. Detective Irene Salcido became the county sheriff. She was, by common consent, the best the county had ever had. Colton Briggs, after a year of legal proceedings that cost him his career and his comfortable certainties, but not his freedom, found his way, slowly, imperfectly, back to something like integrity. He sent Nathan a letter once. Nathan read it, sat with it for a day, and wrote back 3 sentences. It was enough. Vera Blackwood was convicted of criminal mischief and conspiracy. She served a suspended sentence and a probationary period, and she sold her house in Kerrville and moved to her sister's place in Austin. Eliza prayed for her. She prayed for her long after she had any obligation to, and in praying for her, she found that the anger had thinned, and what remained was something less painful and more true. Not forgiveness in full yet, but the beginning of it, the door opened by choice, the slow work of grace. Grace, the word that had always felt abstract to Eliza, something from Sunday school, something clean and theological and at a remove from the muddy business of actually living, had become in Redemption Creek the most practical thing she knew. Grace was getting back on biscuit. Grace was staying when leaving was easier. Grace was saying the wrong thing and trying again. Grace was Nathan's hand finding hers in the dark after a hard day, and the simple certainty of not being alone. Her mother said, on her 3rd visit to the ranch, watching Eliza come in from a morning ride with her curls loose and her face brown from the sun and mud on her boots, and the full, settled look of a woman who has found the place she was made for. I never understood before why Silas always said the wrong church would fit you worse than no church. I thought he meant faith. He meant something larger. He meant this, Eliza said, taking off her boots on the porch. He meant the whole thing, the falling and the staying and the belonging. He meant context, Mama. He meant that I needed a context big enough for all of me. Dorothy Harmon looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she said, with the compressed precision of a woman who has learned to say great things in small words, he was right. And because she was Dorothy, she went back inside. And because she was Eliza, she stood a moment longer on the porch in her socks, looking out at the 6,000 acres of hill country that were hers and Nathan's, and in the way that all good land belongs, everyone's who has loved it. And she felt the mourning on her face, and she thought, this is it. This is the inheritance, not just the land. All of it. The broken heel and the biscuits and the stitches above her eye, and the man in the barn with the handwritten deed, the mockingbird and the creek and the morning prayers and Pearl's cornbread, the grief and the danger and the long walk through fear to the other side. Moses on his fence with his bright old eyes saying true things. Pastor Reed with his warm voice telling her that a man had prayed for her by name every week for years. All of it was the inheritance. This, exactly this, was where Grace falls. She went inside for breakfast. She knocked her shoulder on the doorframe going in. She laughed. The house received her with the calm solidity of something that has held many lives and is glad to hold one more. Outside, the mockingbird continued its extravagant, impractical, wholly unnecessary song, and the Redemption Creek Ranch lay in the morning sun in all its imperfect, enduring beauty, and was home. And that, dear friends, is the story of Eliza Harmon and the Redemption Creek Ranch. A story of a woman too alive for the life she was living. A story of a man who had built everything except the one thing he needed. And a story of a God who is patient enough and creative enough to answer prayers with bus schedules and broken heels and 6,000 acres of Texas hill country. If this story moved your heart today, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend, a family member, someone who needs to hear that they belong somewhere, that their life is not a mistake, that the stumbling is part of the journey and not the end of it. Subscribe to the Blessed Christian Storyteller for new stories every week, stories of faith and grace and all the improbable ways that love finds us. And wherever you are today, whatever ground you're standing on, whatever inheritance you're still waiting to claim, I pray that you know this. You are prayed for, by name, by a God who sees you fully and loves what he sees. Until next time, God bless you and keep you, each one.